With 16 employees. It was very successful. He published the auction booklet every Friday for all of Manhattan, which was a big job. And his wife's sister had moved to Dallas, and she came to visit. And she went back and said how much she loved Dallas as opposed to New York, and convinced him to pick up him, his wife, their 4 children that had been born in New York, and moved to Dallas.
She must have been very beautiful.
She was a very nice woman. I never met her. She died when my mother was 7 years old. She had 9 children. The other 5 were born in Dallas. And she died not in childbirth, but a few months after my youngest aunt was born of Bright's disease, which is a kidney disease. The corollary to that story is my father's parents lived in New York, and his wife had a sister who had moved to the Dallas area, and I'm not sure if they moved directly to Tyler or Dallas. She came down to visit them, loved it so much she convinced her husband and all 4 children to move to Texas.
Interesting. Texas must have been the wild, I bet.
Well, I'm not sure when the Angers moved here. However, I do know that my mother's next oldest sister was born here. Her name was Edith Ungerman. You might have heard of her. She was born, I believe, in 1908, because Mother was born in 1910. So they must have moved here to Dallas around 1906 or 7, something like that.
So there was 9 children.
Yes.
So your grandfather, who worked in a tavern?
Yes, when he moved to Texas, no longer was a printer. He went to work for his a relative of his wife in a tavern. It was a bar, but the kids didn't want to put barkeeper at school, so they called it a tavern. And he did that for a while, and then of course Prohibition came in, and then he went to work for Magnolia Oil Company in the Magnolia building downtown.
Doing?
As a bookkeeper, the tallest building in Dallas at the time, which later became Mobil and now is ExxonMobil, until he retired in about 41 or 2.
Well, if there was 9 children, and he was a tavern keeper and a bookkeeper, it must have been pretty hard to make ends meet. Does your mother ever talk about?
Never said any problem in that regard. They lived on Ross Avenue, about 2 blocks east of what was called Central Avenue at the time, which you know was Central Expressway, in a nice home. My grandfather and all 9 children. When his wife died, my grandmother, Jenny's, Jenne, or Jennie, I'm not sure. Her sisters wanted to split up the children, and my grandfather would have nothing to do with that. He kept all 9 children in the house. They had help. They had maid and wash lady. But my oldest aunt, Beatrice Angers Goldberg, kind of took over as the mother, and then she married, and then the next daughter, Sadie Angers Solomon, took over, and then when she got married, it went down the line. Now there were some brothers in there too, Isidore, Ephraim, and then after Sadie there was Edith, and then my mother, and then finally he broke up housekeeping. I'm not sure when, but it would probably have been sometime during World War II. But the family goes back a long time. The Yonics were members of Sherith Israel almost from the beginning, although that's not true, because Sherith, I think, started in about 1881. And so they were maybe there 15, 20 years after it started. But if you count my great-grandmother, and then my grandmother, and then my mother, and then me, and then my daughter, and my daughter's daughter, my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, who lives in Frisco, Texas, who's studying for her bat mitzvah. She is a sixth-generation Sheriff Israel member.
It's interesting. So you were there at the beginning.
I was.
Well, your family was. Your family was.
I was bar mitzvahed there. I was confirmed there at Sheriff.
What was the extent of your parents' participation? Well, your grandparents too, participation at Sheriff Israel. Were they active
Oh,
members?
they were members. I don't know that they were active. I had an uncle who was the Milton Angrist, who was the head of the Chevra Kadisha for many years. His younger brother, who he was very close to, died at Normandy Beach in World War II. And after that happened, he became active in the Chevra Kadisha, and it became kind of a family business because subsequently one of my cousins, there are 17 of us cousins, Mark Becker was in the Chevra. Another cousin's, Barry Solomon's daughter, Carol Goldberg, is in the Chevra. My wife has been the head of the ladies division of Chevra for 20 years at least. So that was their main thing. Of course, there were other things. They were on school boards and things of that sort at Sheriff. But one cousin was president of the synagogue, Steve Ungerman. Byron Ungerman, his father, who married Edith, was a...
That's Steve Ungerman's
father,
yeah.
Was active on the lawyers committee and was very helpful when it came time to fight a lawsuit dealing with whether or not the shul could move to where it is at
Douglas?
Douglas. That's kind of an interesting story. There was a man named Gold who might have been Jewish at one time, but I don't think he was at the time that the shul bought the property at Douglas near the tollway, which was the Cotton Belt Railroad at the time, and Walnut Hill. Didn't want any religious house in his neighborhood. Could have been a Jewish house, but he put it that way, and he filed a lawsuit and went to federal court. And Uncle Meyer and the lawyers committee hired Henry Strasburger, who was at the time the leading trial lawyer in the city of Dallas, to defend the shul. And he did successfully defend the shul, and that's why the shul is there. His grandfather might have been Jewish. Henry Strasburger was not a practicing Jew. And to my knowledge, he is the only person who has a memorial plaque at Sheriff who's not Jewish. You'll find Henry Strasburger's memorial plaque at the shul.
It's a Jewish name.
That's what I say. I think his grandfather was Jewish.
Yeah, Jewish name. How is your wife a Dallasite?
Yes, she was born in Dallas. She comes from a large family also. Her father is a Weinberger, and together with the two of her aunts married two brothers, the Richmonds, and between the Weinbergers and the Richmonds, they owned Ward Drug Company, which was the biggest drugstore chain in Dallas, Fort Worth, Waco, Austin at the time. And she was born here. She actually worked at Ward's at one time. But the rest of the Weinbergers and Richmonds basically stayed here. But her father, who had been in the Army and was stationed in Hawaii, had gone through San Francisco on the way there and back, and he liked it so much that when he came back, he picked up the family and they moved to San Francisco when Janice was 12. And she didn't like it out there. She didn't like cold weather. She didn't like fog. She went to high school, junior high, high school, 1 year at Cal, a year at a city college, and then she just picked up and came back to Dallas. And she's been here ever since. But she was born at St. Paul Hospital on Gaston Avenue, as was my sister.
How did you meet?
Well, I was at SMU Law School at the time, and one of my friends named Fred Tyne told me that he wanted me to take out his, you need something?
Pen.
One of his, the pencils are over there if you want to get it. Fred Tyne was married to Judy Richmond. And Fred said to me one day at law school, I want you to take out my wife's cousin. And I said, Freddie, I knew your wife before you did. We were in confirmation class together at Sheriff. I know all of her cousins. I'm not taking out any of her cousins. They're either married or I don't care for them. He said, well, you don't know this cousin. She moved to San Francisco, and she's just moved back to Dallas about a year ago. So my part of the story is that I said, okay, if you'll give me your criminal law outline, because I know you did well in that course, I will take the girl out. Janice has a different side to that story. But anyhow, and that's how we met in, Mickey, in November of 1961, and we married in September of 1963 after I graduated law school.
You weren't raised in Dallas, I don't think.
Dallas was always our home, but my father was a career Army officer. He went to Texas A&M, graduated in 1933. Everybody who went to A&M, first of all, was male, and second of all, was in the Corps, and third of all, when they graduated, they had a commission in the United States Army. He graduated as a chemical engineer. He, in 1933, looking for a job as a chemical engineer, was rather limited. There was one employer in the country that was hiring, as I understand it, and that was DuPont. They did not hire Jews. So he got a job for an oil company down on the coast, first Port Arthur and then Houston. That's why I was born in Houston. In the lab, something he could have done with a high school education. And he did that for about, well, they married in 35, and we moved to Dallas when I was 3, so what is that? Well, in 41, he activated himself before Pearl Harbor, because he knew he was going to be activated. And so that's basically when we moved back to Dallas. What was the question? I didn't.
The question was, where were you? You're doing well. But you went to school, not in Dallas.
No. When I was 3, I moved to Dallas. The first school I went to was Bradfield. Found out later that my wife went to the first year in Bradfield, but she was 3 years younger. I didn't know her at the time. You're not going to believe this part of the story. We would live with aunts and uncles because there was no such thing as apartments or finding housing as on your own when my father would go on maneuvers to Fort Polk, Louisiana, Fort Rucker, Alabama, and so forth. Sometimes we followed him, like to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. We lived in West Palm Beach, Florida for a year. We lived in Phoenix for 6 months. We would follow him, but there were times that he would be away, and so we would live with, usually with Aunt Edith Ungerman at that point. Aunt Edith's house was on the corner of Larchmont and Armstrong Parkway. Across Armstrong Parkway was a red brick, looked like a Lincoln log, if you remember those, 2-story house. And in that house lived William and Helen Weinberger, their baby girl Janice, and her brother Henry. And I was living there across the street from my future wife, and neither one of us knew it until many years later.
Did you ever meet each other at that age?
No, but I can tell you this. I must have been precocious because I distinctly remember being in Annie's backyard and looking across the street and seeing this most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. And she turned out to be my mother-in-law, and she continued to be the most beautiful woman that you could imagine. But I do remember her, but I don't remember the rest of the family. So anyway, I went to Bradfield and then many other schools. I went to 12 schools before I graduated high school.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is the last school I was in for 3 years, so that was 11 schools between the first grade and the beginning of sophomore year.
You went to college.
Well, when Dad was in the, as I say, in the Army in World War II, and his last station was in West Palm Beach, Florida. We were there for a year. My kids don't believe it when I tell them I walked a mile to school, both ways uphill in the snow. They say they'll go with the both ways uphill, but they won't go with the snow in West Palm Beach, Florida. Wise guys. Then we moved back to Dallas and lived with my Aunt Bee Goldberg and her husband and her daughter and her son, one of her sons. The other son was fighting with the Seabees in the Aleutian Islands, Julian. Excuse me.
Seabees.
Seabees is the engineering group of the Navy. They built bridges overnight and did all kinds of engineering work. So when Dad went to Europe, he was in England, France, Germany in 44, 45. He was at the Battle of the Bulge right after it was won by the Americans, so he actually went in combat, but he did get frostbite there, which troubled him for the rest of his life. We lived with Aunt Bee. Her house was on Meadow Road, which is 2 blocks from Fair Park, about 2 blocks from 2nd Avenue going south. And I went to Hebrew school in a house on Park Road. All the Jews, 99% of the Jews, well, I'll take it back. By 1945, probably 10 or 15%, you would know better, had moved to Holland Park, but most of them were still in South Dallas, South Boulevard, Park Row, Meadow, all of those streets. Most of them went to Forest Avenue High, which I think is called Madison. No, it may be called Madison. I'm not sure what it's called now. And the Hebrew school was on Park Road. Used to walk to Hebrew school. So
uphill both ways?
No, that was not that bad. I was the president of the chapter, and then I was a regional president for upstate New York. And some of those guys I kept track of. In fact, I had a deposition at the Carrier Corporation after I was practicing law. Carrier Corporation's home office is in Syracuse, and I got together with them that were still there. Took my wife with me. We were there for 3 days. But really, all of my friends from the old days are Columbia. Mm-hmm. Before that, well, the ones that I know in Dallas, I can list,
right.
50 people here that I knew either from Congregation Sherith Israel, or when I was in BBYO, or when I'd come back in the summer, or when but not the friends from those other places.
What made you decide to go into the law?
2 things. A lack of aptitude for anything else, and a little bit of aptitude for it. And plus I had 2 uncles who were, well, I actually had 3 uncles who were lawyers, but one of them was the one, Uncle Bernard Angers, who was killed at Normandy. He got a degree from SMU, but I don't think he practiced very long before he went into service. He was the youngest, next to youngest of the 9 children. But the 2 uncles were partners, Meyer Ungerman and Milton Angrist. And I used to go to the office and work there from age 12 on, doing things. And, I was a history major. I liked history, and I just gravitated to it.
Talk a little bit about your sister, because she's had a pretty interesting life. I don't believe she lives in Dallas.
No, she lives on West End Avenue in New York. She went to American Heidelberg High. When she graduated, she came back and went to UT. She started UT when I started SMU. That was an amazing thing. Dad went to her high school graduation and then caught a flight out of Frankfurt and made it to my graduation from Columbia, and I didn't know he was coming. Oh. It was baccalaureate service day, the day before, and I'm standing out in line, and one of my frat brothers comes over and says, "Your dad's at the fraternity house." I said, "My father is not at the fraternity house. You got the wrong guy." Come on, Byron. Tex. For 3 years in Syracuse and for 4 years at Columbia, I was known as Tex. And all my friends from that era know me as Tex, and some of them don't even know Byron. And I went there, and he had made it. And then he took 2 or 3 hops to get down to Dallas. And then, anyway, my sister we're talking about. She went to UT, was a drama major. After graduating, my folks were stationed in Sacramento, California. And she went there for a while, and then finally just went to New York. And she ended up being a casting director for 2 or 3 of the large ad agencies. Bates and I can't remember the other name right now, but they were very big. And she worked in a building on Madison Avenue and casted commercials, some of which you may remember. You remember the American Tourister luggage with the ape coming down the stairs, stomping on suitcases? She casted that. And then she was friends with Gene McFadden, who was the head of special projects for Macy's, namely the parade, Thanksgiving Day parade and other things, store openings, Tapathon, July 4th fireworks in the East River. And they've been they were roommates and had been together ever since. I don't know when they got together. Probably sometime in the late '60s. Oh yeah, over 30 years. And they live together in Manhattan on West End, and they have a house up in Connecticut. And then finally she retired.
Let's see, what haven't we covered? I think we covered it all.
You asked me the other day if I had a role model, did you?
Yes. Have you thought about that?
Yes, I have thought a little bit more about it. I told you Monday when we talked that my grandfather, William Angress, was the sweetest, most kind man that I'd ever met in my life, and so I tried to imitate him unsuccessfully. He was known as Papa, so when my children were born, we have 3 children. Cindy Falk, who's married to Charles Rahm, they live in the Park Cities. Deborah Goger, who's married to Mark Goger and has Kara Goger, our oldest grandchild. They live in Frisco. And then our son Andrew is married to Kristen, and they live in Yorktown, Virginia, where he's a college professor, and they have 2 children. Anyhow, when I had my children, as an incentive to be like my grandfather, I had them call me Papa. Of course, they changed that to Pop when they got to be teenagers. But all the grandchildren call me Papa.
For you, how has this city changed? You've been here on and off for 70 years.
Yeah,
do you miss the old days, or
no,
do you?
I mean, on Saturdays we'd go to town, and all the country folk would come in, mainly blacks, and it'd just be crowded. And we used to ride a bus and a streetcar when we were 10, 11, 12 years old to town by ourselves. When I lived on Northwest Highway and Thackeray, Northwest Highway, by the way, was a 2-lane road. I would walk to school or ride my bike to Preston Hollow, which is on Walnut Hill, which is a mile. I would go about 2 blocks to Bandera that had some apartments, and from there on it was all fields. And going south from Northwest Highway, they were building homes. I watched them build the first big water tower, that one that maybe you remember, it was red. Now it looks different. It's a big red ball on the corner of Northwest Highway and Hillcrest. That was a sight to watch. So that was a big change. The Coca-Cola bottle and company stands out in my mind. That was on the corner of 2nd Avenue, right near where I lived, 2 blocks away when I was at Aunt Bee's house in 44. We had streetcars, we had buses, and we had bus streetcars. They were like buses, not on rails, but they had electric things up the top that carried them just like I don't know what you call it.
I thought about it. There was 9 brothers and sisters, actually 8 for the majority of your life. How did you spend the holidays? Were they all together? I mean, that's a big number.
We used to go to the Angress side Seder, and then we would drive to Tyler and go to the Falk side Seder. It was smaller because there was 4 children, and actually one of them lived in Norman, Oklahoma, and I don't remember him coming down every Seder, but the others were there, and they had one aunt had 1 child, and one aunt had 2. So that was a small Seder, but the Angress side, I mean, it could be 40, 50 people. I remember one Seder at Aunt Edith's house on Larchmont. There was a big living room, and then the dining room, and the tables just went all the way across, and probably there was a T. And there was a lot of talking and a little bit of davening up at the front. And one of those days that my cousin and I, Jay Ungerman, Edith's middle child, and I had gone downtown on the bus to see a movie the afternoon that the first Seder was going to be held. Big deal, the movie lasted an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we would be back in time. Well, we went to see The Greatest Show on Earth, which is about a 3-hour movie. When we got back, they were not pleased because they had delayed the Seder for us. And I said, it's his fault. And he says, it's my fault. But yes, the Seders were the one big family gathering. Mm-hmm. And they were fun.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this interview?
Just one final question. Mm-hmm. Why did you select me? I'm way too young to be doing this kind of this.
I don't know. We just drew straws.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Pleasure. I'm just curious, you had so many role models. It sounded like Papa Angus was one. If you had to say who really influenced your life, would you have someone you could name?
My father was a very strong man, and I admired him immensely. My mother, I always wanted to be as easily with strangers as she. She was a hard worker and really had it tough, and she was a role model. In later life, my role model has been my wife Janice, who is a volunteer of the First Order. She's been brailing textbooks for kids. Now she's on the Visual Aid Volunteers Board of Directors. She's been at the Shul Big Board, the Shul Education Board. She was an honorary life member of PTA. She was a life member of, she was active in the Girl Scouts, and as I told you before, she's done Cover Conditions, so she's been a role model. My son has been a role model. I've never seen anybody better with children than he is. And I'm not talking just about his own two kids, but I'm talking about when he taught high school, when he taught, now teaches college. And both my daughters, my middle daughter, Deborah, here's what she's like when she's the middle child, and Janice would bring her a little present of some sort. She said, I can't have it. And Janice said, it's a present for you, Deborah. She said, not unless you give something to Andy and Cindy. Mm. Now, you don't run into kids like that. Mm. And my oldest daughter is very quiet, but very sharp, very clever, and artistic. So all of those were role models for me. I just haven't been able to make much with it.
I don't know. Sounds like you're the cause of it.
Yeah, so. Right.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
This is my grandmother, Jenny Yannick Angrist, who had the 9 children and then died when the youngest turned age 3 months.
Okay, I've got you here. Now let's go over to that.
This is a picture taken at Thanksgiving at our house in either 05 or 06. This is me, and this lady, Janice, I've always referred to as my first wife. This is our oldest daughter, Cindy, and her husband, Charles. This is our middle daughter, Deborah, and her husband, Mark, and their child, Kara, who's going to be bat mitzvahed at Sheriff next year. This is our baby son, Andrew, who's a college professor, and his wife, Kristen, and their son, Noah, who's now 9, and their daughter, Lauren, who's now 6.
Tell us a story about...
And this fatso is me.
The thespian grandson, what he said.
He's in the community playhouse, and he's
in Annie.
He played in Annie as FDR. When he went in for his audition, they said, Noah, are you nervous about your audition? He says, the only thing I have to fear is fear myself. He got the part.
Thanks. I'm so mad I couldn't get it on.